So I think, well, the Hangout is live. Let me see if
Okay.
it's showing. Uh, I just have the other
Yep.
page on.
All right.
Okay, so we're live.
Great. Awesome.
Okay, so André, as I can
Yep.
see, there is a little tiny delay between what we see and
Okay.
actually what we talk here.
Okay.
But we are live, okay? So you can say hi to everybody.
All right. So, hello, everyone. I hope you are doing okay. I'm not sure where you are right now. I'm here in the UK. I know Fabi's in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, but
Yes.
welcome. And I'm very honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Welcome to Talking EFL officially. This is my
Yes.
first live, so I'm kind of nervous, but
Okay.
having such a nice guest here is going to make things easier, I'm sure.
All right. Thank you. That's great, Fabi.
Okay, so would you like to start talking a little bit about what is it you are doing here, there in the UK? The floor
Yeah.
is all yours.
All right. Well, I'm here in the UK because I got a scholarship. I'm not sure if everybody knows about the scholarship. It's called Chevening, and it's a pretty great scholarship that covers all the costs we have here. So I'm doing a master's course here in psychology of education in the wonderful city of Bristol, England, and I'm having a lot of fun, learning a lot. I miss my cats and my wife, of course, but it's been great so far. That's basically what I'm doing.
Very good. And so I understand that what you are basically studying is mind, brain, and education, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to the tough questions already.
All
So
right.
what what have you learned already that you know that could be that there could have a direct application to us here, EFL teachers?
Well, Fabi, that's a great question. I think maybe I should explain a little bit what MBE is so that everybody knows what I'm talking about, some context. So MBE stands for Mind, Brain, Education. Funnily enough, here in the UK, they call BME, Brain, Mind, and Education. I think my professor wanted to be original, different, I don't know. And what we study basically is cognitive neuroscience, cognitive psychology, and education, or pedagogy and educational theories, learning theories from education. And it's a very interesting field because it puts together all those three areas that have done a lot of great work already. So a lot of things are available for us to look into. And what we're trying to do, and that's the big dilemma. So it was a really tough question you asked me. What we're trying to do is translate whatever we find in this new area, new science, and make it available for teachers to use in the classroom and for learners as well. When we are studying, we should be able to use some of the strategies to make learning more effective. That's the big challenge. There have been some initiatives. For example, there's this wonderful initiative by Johns Hopkins University, brain targeted. It's called brain targeted teaching, if I'm not mistaken, and they have sort of step by step procedure type of thing for teachers to check when they're planning and delivering and assessing their lessons. And what I'm trying to do with my dissertation is that I want to assess how much teachers already know, because you know what we are trying to promote anyway is what many teachers already know. We've been doing for centuries. Some of the techniques we use, even though we didn't know anything about psychology or neuroscience before, they work because we've been teaching. People have been learning. What we want to do is to make more brain-friendly techniques available so that we know that students are learning even more effectively. Because believe it or not, I mean, every teacher knows that some students don't learn well. So how can we reach those students? What are the difficulties they're facing? What are their struggles? So maybe if we look inside their brains with the technology that we have available nowadays, maybe we can find something that will give us some evidence or point us in some direction so that we can help them. So that's the idea, right?
Nice, nice. You mentioned something that really caught my eye here. You mentioned that we teachers, we already kind of do this on a daily
Yes.
basis in the classroom. That leads me to that presentation you had in Caxias do Sul talking about
Oh,
neuro myths.
yes.
So, how
I can
far
share
we are
some.
actually how far we are actually putting neuroscience into practice, and how much we are believing in neuromyths around.
Well, so I think that's one of the biggest dilemmas nowadays because, and one of my professors, Paul Howard Jones, is a big reference in the area here in the UK, in the world. He says that there are many neuromyths. He tested some school teachers in the UK, asking about those neuromyths to check how much they knew about them. But we are not going to give teachers a step-by-step, a recipe of how to teach their lessons. Even if they believe in neuromyths or not, does that translate into something that they are doing in the classroom? So that's one very important question we have to ask. So what are some of the neuromyths that we believe, for example? I'm sure a lot of people have heard that we only use 10% of our brains, right? So this is a very common one. I remember watching a movie with Morgan Freeman and Scarlett Johansson, Lucy, I think, that
Yeah.
she unlocks, her potential, and then she can use like 100% of her brain. She controls matter. Yeah, we cannot do that. And we don't just use 10% of our brains. We use different percentages of our brains at different times. Even when we're sleeping, we use a lot of our brains. That's when we're making connections, consolidating memory, cleaning our brains. So this could be a bad myth, but how much does it really impact in the classroom? If you think, if you believe that, okay, maybe my students only use 10% of their brain. So yeah, so what? So maybe there are no consequences. But on the other hand, we have another neuromyth, the learning styles myth, which is not that bad at all sometimes if you look from a different perspective, but could be very dangerous. So Howard Gardner, the guy who wrote about multiple intelligences back in the 80s, he wrote that some people have different ways of learning things and they can be better at some things than other things. And then we sort of simplified the message into 3 or 4 very fixed learning styles: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, for example. It is bad to think that, for example, one of my students has only one of the styles and then give that student some sort of support, with input in that style. So let's imagine one of my students did one of those online tests, and this student of mine is a visual learner, according to the test. So the student is struggling in the classroom. As a teacher and knowing the learning styles theory, I would probably tell the student, you need to get more visual input. You have to work with more visual things. Your homework should have, pictures or videos or things like that. But that's not necessarily true. We know that for us to learn better and to memorize things for a longer time, we have to have multiple representations of that information in our brains, not just visually, but phonologically, for example. So the learning styles thing is a good thing if you believe that everybody has one of the 3 styles, and then you teach to everybody so that you can cater for all of their demands. That's good. But if you believe that they have only one, and then you start just focusing on that particular learning style, that might be bad for learning. And there's a lot of evidence out there showing that if I did a test, I was classified as an auditory learner. If I just use auditory input to learn, that doesn't mean I learn better. So there's a lot of, they've done a lot of studies showing that if you get input, instruction in your preferred learning style, that doesn't mean you're going to learn better. In fact, you're probably going to learn worse, because then you are kind of, disregarding the other styles and focusing on just one. So those are the things we have to be careful about,
Yeah, I remember one thing in particular that, sorry, that you mentioned in
Yep.
terms of the much that we take, that students take to
Yep.
learn, and that
Yep.
myth that if I start studying, for example, after I'm an adult, I won't be
Yep.
able to learn as well.
Yes.
Could you talk to us a bit more about that?
Yeah, this is Tracy Tokuhama. I'm gonna show her book later.
Mm-hmm.
She's the queen or the princess. I'm not sure. Mirella Ramaciotti, by the way, who's the biggest reference that we have there in Brazil, and she's probably the best teacher I've ever had. She
Mm-hmm.
talks a lot about Tracy Tokuhama, and I'm not sure she refers to her as a queen or the princess of MBE, but she put together six principles, five principles, and then one was added by Eric Kandel. And the fourth principle says that the brain is highly plastic, which means that we can learn throughout our whole lives. We can make connections throughout our whole lives. It is true that kids and teenagers, they go through this period that we call the exuberant period, that they're making more connections than we are as adults. And it seems that it might be easier for them to learn certain things, but naturally, or acquire. But if we compensate that with the effort and using our prior knowledge, because we know more than kids, we can learn as well as kids, to be honest. And they published a paper maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago showing that even old people, the elderly, they can learn, they can still learn a lot. They still have a lot of plasticity, enough for them to learn. What is the implication of knowing that? So if you are a teacher and you have a senior student who probably has all those, fears and is probably very intimidated by the fact that now I have to learn English, I should learn English. What can you tell that student? That maybe a 50 or 60-year-old student that goes to your class, you can say, listen, there's a lot of research out there showing that we can still learn at any age, so you don't have to worry so much. It's possible. I've seen it happen. I have a 69-year-old student in Brazil, Mr. João, and he started learning English, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, and he actually got to the C1 level, which is impressive because he had the time to put into that. So this opens a lot of new possibilities for people who are, trying to get into something, a new hobby, learn something different. It doesn't matter how old you are, you can always learn. And learning is excellent for the brain because you make connections. You can actually, especially for that age, you can fight neurodegenerative diseases better. So, it's never too late to learn. That's the idea.
Yeah. I have you told me that I have a student that she's 70 years old. She's my
Yep.
pride and joy, really. She's
Yeah.
wonderful to work with. And one of the things that was really interesting about her is that she was the first one to take technology, embrace technology to the fullest.
Oh, that's
And
great.
yeah, and obviously she has this kind of blocks that she brings from past
Yeah.
experiences. But
Yes.
what I've been trying to work with her is exactly what you said. Like,
Yeah.
it's okay. We can actually do this. It's
You
not.
can.
Yeah, you don't bring
And
any kind of deficiencies, right?
yeah. And what you're saying is it's a very good example of what metacognition is.
Mm-hmm.
Teaching them about how we learn, how the brain works. And there are studies showing that when you teach kids and adults and senior citizens that they have plasticity, that the brain learns this way, they can learn better because sometimes they have this belief that they were born with a certain amount of talent,
Mm-hmm.
Carol Dweck calls it a fixed mindset. So if you have a fixed mindset, you believe that you are only capable of doing this. You cannot do anything more than this. Your intelligence is limited by whatever, maybe genetics. You were born that way. Then you don't even try, and maybe I would say very likely that's why you can't do it, because you don't even try, or you have all those fears. You don't let yourself do something new and find out that you can actually do it. So we have
Mm-hmm.
to take care of those things too.
Mm-hmm. Is there any kind of line of research that talks about certain types of special needs in terms of mind and brain and education? I'm talking about, for example, autistic
Yes.
children, how they learn, and is there anything
Yeah.
from MBE that we can use to help these people that come with special needs?
Yes, there's a lot of research about individuals with autism, with dyslexia, dyscalculia, which could be summarized, kind of described as dyslexia for numbers, for example,
Mm-hmm.
ADHD, attention deficit disorder. And one of the things that I like very much, and I think Mirella has used that many times, my professors here have used that, they are variabilities of healthy brains. So this is something, they are not so different from us, if you think about that. And
Mm-hmm.
because of evolution, because of the way that we had you know, to go through time and learn things and become what we are today, there were individuals that developed in a more specific, a little different way, and they cannot adapt to the way we teach, because the way we teach was socially constructed. So it's not natural if you think about the educational system. So let's talk about ADHD, for example. It is very hard for kids to sit their butts for 6 7 hours listening to a very teacher-centered teacher speaking about many things, because they just can't do it, because they want to move, they want to stand up, they want to do something. And maybe the problem is the way we teach things, the things that we have to teach, the educational system, and not the kids themselves. So yes, there's a lot of research showing that we do learn in very different ways. The first principle of MBE says that brains are as unique as faces. So what does that tell us about personalization,
Yes.
diversification, differentiation? And
Mm-hmm.
imagine if you have a special educational need, it's even more different. So what we have to try to do, I think, is to learn that we can include in the way we teach strategies, elements that will give everyone the opportunity to be their own boss, the boss of their own learning, to become more independent and more autonomous. And again, if we look at those variabilities in terms of everybody is different, everybody has a different brain, they evolve that way. Maybe we can start thinking about more inclusive schools. That's something that I dream of. For example, I think we could include people with different backgrounds, with different needs. We just kind of have to change a little bit the way we set up the environment, the way we teach, our methods. And everybody
Yeah.
can learn. That's the whole, learning is what the brain does. That's what MBE says. So even though we might not be using the best techniques, the best strategies, we still learn, because that's what the
Yeah.
brain does, right? Imagine if we can learn how to use the best or most effective techniques and strategies, then learning will be even better.
Mm-hmm. That's very, very interesting. Well, I'm going to use this link that you just mentioned, this thing as a link,
Yeah.
talking about schools, bilingual education.
Yes.
Well, we know that there are many advantages for the bilingual brain. Can you
Yes.
tell us a bit about that?
Oh yeah, definitely. So I was, Rodolfo Machello. We're gonna have chá pedagógico tomorrow. That's why I'm drinking some tea here, and
Yes.
like an hour ago, I was talking to him about this course that we are developing about bilingualism, and we were trying to find things that we can, speak about from the neuroscience perspective. In my case, in linguistics, and there are a lot of overlaps, a lot of things that we can talk about. For example, a bilingual brain is better at making decisions because the prefrontal cortex that is responsible for what we call inhibitory control, so kind
Mm-hmm.
of holding us back when we're making decisions and switching from using this word or that word. So if you have a lot of languages in your brain, if you know how to speak more than one language, your inhibitory control has to be trained, switching languages or translanguaging, like we say, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we develop better reasoning and mathematical skills because we know another language. I think the best benefit is that we protect our brain from neurodegenerative diseases like dementia, Alzheimer's. Some of the research shows, for example, that the early symptoms of those diseases are going to appear only 5, 6, or even 7 years after they would if you were monolingual, for example. So you get an extra 5 years, of full cognitive functions, and
Yes.
you also improve memory and attention. So I always tell people when I'm teaching, I'm delivering a workshop, being bilingual is good for everything. It's awesome because you develop more tolerance, you can communicate with the world, you can learn how to express ideas that you cannot in your language because you don't have the vocabulary, for example. So you can look at the world, you can see things you didn't used to see, like different shades of blue, for example, in Russian, or some tribes in Indonesia, or Aboriginal tribes. They know how to, where exactly they are located, if they're going north, south, or east or west. Like if you ask anybody in Brazil right now, which way are you going? Are you going west? We have no idea, but it's part of their language, so they know how to find themselves. If they're lost, they know where to go. So this is amazing.
Oh, every now and then I have an airplane passing by because I live by the
Yeah,
airport.
I remember that very well. When I used to live in Moema, I
Yeah,
used
I
to live
live here.
exactly. I lived, like actually very close to Outback. There, the shopping center, the mall.
Mm-hmm. I
So
live
I,
I live in the other side.
so yeah, I remember that very well. Every 10, 15 minutes, right?
Yes. Well, that's lovely so far. That's really something interesting. It just I even remembered the PC that I took with me, Ella,
Yes,
talking about the weight of the brain of a bilingual brain being
yes.
heavier than a monolingual brain. That really
We have more
was mind
connections,
blowing.
right? So this is one of the things that when I was talking about bilingualism, a lot of authors, a lot of scientists have actually seen inside the brain that the more proficient you get, the more similar the neural network or the neuronal network that you use for language. So, for example, if you are a Brazilian native speaker, Portuguese native speaker from Brazil, and you are an A1 in English, so you've just started studying English, and so your levels of L1 and L2 are very different, right? But and then you are going to see a very different activation in different areas of the brain because if you use one language or the other. But when you get very, very proficient, you are going to see very similar patterns of activation. So the neuronal networks are going to be very similar, which suggests that the more proficient you get, the more overlaps you have in the brain, and that means you can learn L2 almost to proficiency, almost the same as L1. And then again, so the problem is not how early you start, but how far you go. So you have to go all the way. You have to go. That's the thing. That's why a lot of adults, they never get to the proficiency levels, because we know from experience that adults, they will study for a while, and then life happens, and then they have to make tough decisions, and then and
Yes.
kids, they don't really have an option, right? But of course, yes, kids, they do have a neuro advantage. They're making more connections, but again, we can compensate. We can, as adults, if we put in the effort and we just go all the way, we don't give up, we can compensate that.
That's very, very interesting. I'm going to have just a leap forward. I
Okay.
was I was reading your article on your blog about your
Yeah.
experience at the last IATEFL.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
it was amazing. Could you talk to us a bit about that?
Oh, yes. It was my first IATEFL. Unfortunately, I had to leave much sooner than I had hoped, because, I have essays, assignments here. So I only got to go one day. And I think I chose the right day, because John Gray was talking about diversity in ELT, about inclusion, about how books, ELT materials, they normally steer away from taboos. And so if we're talking about LGBTQ plus, people with disabilities, for example, different ethnicities, so we don't really see models or role models of those people in books, which is a strategy used by publishers, to avoid complications in certain countries that might not be okay with that. But I was really excited, not only to go and see some of the plenaries and the sessions, meet some old friends from Cultura Inglesa, a lot of people from Cultura Inglesa there,
Yeah.
and and I think so. There, one of the things that I think one of the main messages that I got from that day that kind of reinforces this MBE thing is that we are not dealing with our students' emotions. There are a lot of people in the classroom who might have something to say, who might want to participate, collaborate, but they feel that they don't have a voice because they belong to those minority groups, because they feel like they're going to be judged, people are not going to accept them. And I think that we are spending a lot, as teachers, as policymakers, as school managers, we spend a lot of time thinking about the curriculum, the content, the scope and sequence of the lessons, but we're not talking about our students' emotional intelligence or social emotional skills. And that's the first barrier, because if they are in the classroom and you are unable to cross that barrier, then learning will likely not happen. And I think so. The message for me was that, we have to create this welcoming environment that people feel free and safe to share whatever they want. And we have to make sure that we establish an emotional connection with our students. And, we should develop the emotional connection between the student and their peers as well, because that's the thing we're not paying too much attention to. And then if we do that, Stephen Krashen knew about this in the 70s with the affective filter and everything. Antonio Damasio, Portuguese neuroscientist, Imordino Yang, they talk about, they published a paper that the title was "We Feel, Therefore We Learn," instead of "I am, therefore," I forgot the kata said something like,
I think,
I
therefore I
think,
am.
therefore I am, right? So we feel, therefore we learn. So the brain needs to feel emotion, needs to feel the reward, the dopamine reward, and feel, safe to learn. And I think if we don't talk about diversity, if we don't accept others' ideas, maybe we're not doing the best thing we can to be inclusive and to make sure that our students can learn more effectively. So that was the message, anyway, from that day.
That's really great. Taking one thing that you have mentioned right now, talking about the emotional connection.
Yeah.
Do you think that through establishing this emotional attachment, this
Yeah.
relevance that we find somehow, we can, for example, address issues in class in an easier way. I mean, for example,
Yeah.
when you are giving feedback to students, is it
Yeah.
easier for them to absorb what we are saying?
I believe it is. It might be harder for us to be harsher on them because now we have
Mm-hmm.
a stronger connection. But I believe that it's important for, as a person, as a human being, for me to admire someone and respect someone and to value their opinion about the work that I'm producing. I think it's much more effective feedback than if I just listen to someone that I don't really know, I have no connection with, even though this person might be an expert or not. But I care much more about what this person that I know, that is a reference, that I admire, that I look up to, has to say about the things that I've been doing, because I want to be responsible, and I don't want to let this person down many times, you know. That's why every lesson, every first lesson that I teach, I normally take 10, 15 minutes to establish this connection. I've been doing the same thing for 10 years, you know, a true or false about my life, so that my students know the kind of teacher that they have, if I'm cool or not. And then I ask them to interview me. So I normally, you know, write 5 or 6 sentences about myself, very funny sentences. I have a mascot, Mr. Trunk, to
Hi,
establish
Mr.
the
Trunk.
connection, right? There he is. And Mr. Trunk has changed the way it might, you know, seem like a very silly idea, but it's not. I mean, it has changed the way that I connected with my students, because my students started taking Mr. Trunk home and taking pictures of Mr. Trunk doing whatever they did in their family's house, you know, and then they had to bring those pictures and share with the rest of the class. So I got to know, for example, I remember Mr. Trunk rode a motorcycle with one of my students and her dad, and I had no idea that she liked motorcycles, and she would probably have never showed it to me if I didn't have Mr. Trunk, maybe in a different activity. But they want to take Mr. Trunk to the most unusual places, you know, the coolest situations, take pictures, and they are looking, they get, you know, very excited to share those pictures. And then I get to know them better, and my other students get to know them better, and I think we strengthen our relationship in that. So, you know, have a mascot, tell them about yourself, get them to tell you about themselves. What makes them tick? What do they like? What are some of the hobbies that they have? Because then they are more open to listen to you, I guess.
Mm-hmm. If Evelyn Soldera asked you, do you think we should create this emotional connection with young learners as well? Because she is a young learner
Yeah,
teacher. She's
yeah.
always tempted to do so, but she's afraid of their reactions.
Well, that's a very good question. I'd say that I like very much. I'm teaching an active learning methods course right now, and last week we talked about Montessori and Reggio Emilia, right? And one of the characteristics that you have there is that they try to make the environment feel like a home. So they want to feel like they are in family, basically. And then you are going to have this teacher looping thing. So you're going to have a teacher for sometimes 7 years. You're going to have the same teacher. They want to establish this connection. And I think looking at the statistics, at the research, I think Montessorian schools, they work very well. I think there are a lot of, you know, there's some criticism. They don't prepare students academically after a certain age. But for example, a lot of Silicon Valley tycoons like Steve Jobs, and they normally enroll their kids in schools like that. Waldorf, Montessori, Reggio Emilia. I think the guys who created Google, Sergey and Larry, if I'm not mistaken, they went to a Montessorian school. So I'm really for, you know, this idea of establishing a connection even with your young learners, because uh, I don't see why we shouldn't. I mean, it's okay if you're not going to see your student after a while because they're going to grow up and do whatever they do in life. But it's okay also to say goodbye. I mean, we do that in life. It's important for them to create this emotional self-regulation, and I think we can do that better if we establish that connection.
That's very interesting. I have to say that I'm very interested in this area, and we
Yep.
had this talk at Caxias do Sul.
Yes.
What do you recommend for a person like me who is starting in this world of MBE
Yeah.
to read? Do you have any books you recommend?
I do, and I actually have them here. But the first thing I should recommend, MBE is not the final solution. Final solution sounds like a horrible thing, but it's not going to solve all your problems. I think there's a lot about the brain that we don't know. I think even with the techniques that neuroscience has developed, neuroimaging studies, most of the studies are done in a lab, in a hospital, inside an fMRI machine, for example. And those are not the best situations for you to test because, you're trying to figure out what's going on inside a kid's brain in the classroom when you put them in this fMRI machine. So it's a completely different context. So we're still learning a lot. So MBE will give you some guidelines, a framework, some tips, and then you have to reflect on your practice as a teacher, try things out and see what works, what doesn't work, because you know what? We've been teaching for centuries and it's working somehow, not for everybody, but it's working. But if you want books, well, let me show you some. I have a bunch of them. This is probably the best one. This is by Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa, Making Classrooms Better, and 50 practical applications of mind-brain education science. And this, it's a very thick book, but the applications are excellent, things that we can do. You can start tomorrow. If you read the book, I mean, it'll probably take you a month to read the whole book, but you can start using them as soon as you finish. For example, spaced repetition, which is a great thing. Instead of teaching a lot of content in the same lesson, maybe you can break things. I know that the syllabus that we follow, the books that we follow don't allow us to do that so much. So I include like checkpoints. So if I taught something today, next class, I'm going to do a very quick revision with Kahoot, for example, a quiz. And then a week or 2 weeks from that lesson, I'm going to do something again. It's called spaced repetition. And it works very well. We know that students need to sleep to consolidate declarative memory. So asking students to do homework not on the same day, but the next day, for example, to allow them to kind of, internalize. So all those things are here and much more. Another great book, this is in Portuguese, you can find the English version, How We Learn by Benedict Carey. He's still alive, a great journalist, and he put together decades of research of what he calls the learning sciences, the science of learning. So Benedict Carey, How We Learn. You can read my professor's book too, if you're interested. This is Evolution of the Learning Brain. So this is a bit more technical. And this is my lovely professor, Paul Howard Jones. He's always wearing his, flower t-shirts. And, and then we have, if you want to know the connection between brain, mind, body, cognition, emotion, you can read Antonio Damasio's Descartes' Error. So this is a great book, and his message is basically that we cannot separate rationality from emotion, that if we didn't have emotions, for example, we wouldn't be able to do anything in life. And we need our bodies to feel what the world, the stimuli from the environment, they will be captured by our bodies, and then we can form sensations and feelings about those things. And then we can make decisions, we can navigate through life, basically.
Nice. I have a final question from Rodrigo, our very own from Talking EFL.
Sure, great.
Well, Ro is mentioning here, talking about Waldorf and Montessori, In
Yeah.
English classes, we welcome students from different pedagogical backgrounds.
Yes.
Is there a way that we teachers can minimize this impact, for example, with too competitive students and
Yeah.
so on?
Well, that's a very good question. I think it's better if you think about our way of teaching, the more traditional ways of teaching, even the communicative approach, for example, that we do have collaboration, we have pair work, group work, and everything, but we don't allow students to be so autonomous. I think, as you know, if you go to a Waldorfian school, you see that students are very autonomous, very independent, very self-directed, and they don't really assess students in a summative way. So you don't really have grades necessarily in Waldorfian schools like Montessorian schools. So this is a good way to promote collaboration, and I think they kind of find their own pace, the students themselves. So if they're coming from very different pedagogical backgrounds, if maybe a student is coming from something very traditional, grammar translation, another one from, the communicative approach, and I think they're probably going to find what works best because of this a collaborative environment. So they have to negotiate a lot, brainstorm a lot. And it's different when you dictate as a teacher how they should work, what kind of patterns of interaction they should work in. So I think it's even better because it's kind of like when we are working in real life. We have to negotiate with people. We have to ask our boss or our peers, to do something while we do something else. But then again, we bring everything together and we have this service or this product that we're going to sell. And I think that schools like that, they kind of mimic in a way what real life is about. And I think they work best. The problem is the main critique is that it doesn't really prepare them for the SATs or ENEM or vestibular, because it's a different ball game. They need to know a lot of they have to memorize a lot of facts, and this might be true, but then the question I ask is, maybe we should kind of look into this whole traditional system and make a few changes like Finland has done, for example.
Yes. André, I'm afraid we are going to start the final messages here.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Thank
I
you
could
very
stay all
much.
day.
Oh, me too. Me too. That
Yes.
reminds me of the times that we would stay in the staff room in Santo Amaro.
Playing. Remember when I used to play the guitar with Adriano sometimes, the
Oh,
Beatles. Yeah.
oh yes, definitely.
Good
Well,
times. Yeah.
good times. Well, do you have any final messages to tell to who is watching?
Well, in short, I'd say that MBE has a lot of valuable information for teachers. I'm not saying that you should base your whole lesson on MBE and that MBE is going to give you a recipe for you to follow step by step, and then your lesson is going to be perfect. But I'm saying that a lot of the evidence that we have from all those areas, when they're put together and when you use them as a guideline to reflect on your practice, might give you more insight on what you should do, when you should do it, how you should do it. And then maybe learning will be more effective indeed.
Yes, yes. Evelyn is asking if you will be in Curitiba.
Oh, I wish, Evelyn. I'm going back to Brazil in September, I think. So, to be very honest, I'm going to attend some conferences here in Europe since I'm here. So I'm going to Barcelona in a month or so to the Innovate ELT, and I got my proposal accepted in Montenegro. So I'm going to
Yeah,
Montenegro in
I've
June,
heard.
and maybe Poland in September. So I'm actually going to different events here in Europe to see what they're talking about.
Yeah. Well, shameless moment for commercials here.
Yeah,
Evelyn is asking about your talk, your workshop.
yeah.
You do have a workshop that is online, right?
Yeah, well, I do have some online courses that I'm teaching, synchronous courses. So I have one that is called Neuroscience and Learning, and I talk about all those things and a little more, and I give very practical tips that you can use in the classroom, strategies, based on the MBE science. And I'm teaching now an active learning methods, MBE and PBL. So PBL is one of my favorite methods and my experience in Goiânia. So you can follow me on Instagram, EDC Rocks, and you check my bio and I have the links there. And the coolest thing is that Rodolfo Machello and here, André, me, we are developing this bilingualism course. We have the 4 modules ready. Today we talked about the topics. We're going to talk about brain and language. We're going to talk about language acquisition process, thought and language, and something that Rodolfo came up with, applied bilingualism is the last module that we have. So it's going to be great, and it's probably going to be available in June. So we're still working on that. So great news.
Yes, I have to say I'm a big fan of Rodolfo's work.
Yep.
I'll be following you tomorrow for sure in the Pedagogical T.
Yes.
And we have some other very nice courses. I mean, the Brazilian scenario is having great people working with bilingualism. We have, of course,
Yes.
Mirella, that is a great
Yes.
name.
So another suggestion I would give anyone in Brazil, in São Paulo, if you can do one of Mirella's courses, please, São Paulo Open Center, I think she has an online course about neuromyths now. And as I told you, Mirella is definitely one of my best teachers. She kind of dances when she's teaching, she's like a ballerina. And you can also do some free online courses. Learning to Learn, if I'm not mistaken, Barbara Oakley and Peter Sinowski, University of California, San Diego, I think, EDX. So you can try that one. Good Brain, Bad Brain, University of Birmingham, Future Learn. You can also do Neuroscience Applied in the Classroom, Annenberg. I can post the link later, I don't remember.
Please
so there are many
do.
courses you can do. Yeah.
All right. André, I can't thank you enough. Best of luck with the courses you are designing with Rodolfo Machello, right?
Yes.
You guys are both very talented teachers. I'm very proud of being friend of.
Thank you so much. And thank you very much for inviting me, And I would like to thank you even more for this wonderful initiative that is called Talking EFL. I think it's great for everybody. And in a way, I think we got inspired by you, when we started the Pedagogical T, because I think we should team up with professional peers and start things and talk about things so that we can help other teachers and get to know what they're going through and maybe even learn from them as well, right?
Yes. Together we are really stronger, yeah?
Yes, we are.
Thank you very much, André. Everybody, goodbye. Have a wonderful weekend and stay tuned with Talking EFL for more. We have some amazing surprises coming along.
Thank you very much, Fabi. Bye-bye. Mr. Trunk says bye. Have a lovely weekend, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.